Well, today's video is a bit more of food for thought, I suppose, as it were. But it's kind of what we've been chatting about recently, of sort of the biggest question that anybody who's homesteading, growing their own food, probably even farming, for monetary gain, should be asking themselves. And that question really comes down to, I'm going to say it, one word: why? Why is probably the biggest question everybody should be asking themselves about any of this stuff. And we'll go into a little bit of the details on exactly what we mean here. At face value, why is a very simple question, but it's still really important. People often talk about failure and learning, and how really using the best attributes that we have, you really should keep learning your entire life. Always be learning from things, which of course, that's where failures aren't really failures, they're learning opportunities if you kind of look at them through a bit more of a positive light. But simply bumbling through life, gaining learning experiences without really much focus can still leave you feeling like you're asking yourself the very basic question of, what am I doing, or why am I doing this? And so I think that's the linchpin of why this is the biggest question you should always be asking yourself. So why can be a lot of different things. You can be asking the why of a lot of things. A simple example would be, why am I raising chickens? Well, the answer is usually pretty simple. Meat and eggs. You could say enjoyment, but from a homestead scale, those are probably the two biggest reasons of why you're doing it. And by having those clearly defined reasons why, you can basically look at your metrics, how much you're spending on infrastructure, food, time, and it helps with your justification, because if the why is all important, i.e. feeding yourself, that's kind of an important thing. In the case of something like chickens, you're getting multiple products out of the same animal. The why is a lot easier to justify. But of course, you could go right back to sort of the basic question of why, which really is, why are we homesteading? Why are we growing plants and animals? And there's multiple different answers you could have to that question. One could be like the chicken example. I'm simply trying to supply ourselves with food. That's a really good answer. You could also say, I'm doing it for economic reasons. I am doing it to make money. You'll get lots of different opinions from people on what's the best thing to raise, what's the most economical thing to raise, what's the most sustainable thing to raise. And I mean, this goes for plants and animals. You've got your classic commercial livestock, for example. And they're your classic commercial livestock for a reason, because they work in that system, plain and simply. So the why is easy to answer. If you're raising those things, you're usually raising them to try to make money. Nothing wrong with that. The world needs that, but it changes your outcome significantly, because as I just showed with our chickens, partridge chanticleers, are you really going to raise them to be a true chicken farm, supplying the world with chicken? No, you're not, because you can't scale it up like that, to be quite frank. And there's a reason why those hybrids and whatnot are used. So how you answer the question can really depend what you do and how you do it. But then you can go a little further down the line of that question of why. For example, why grow in raised beds? It's not necessarily the most economical way to grow, because it takes more infrastructure than, say, growing in the ground, because you have to have a raised bed. But there's a lot of benefits to it. And those could be as simple as, I'm growing in raised beds because I want to save my back. It could be that it gives you some practical reason, i.e. keeps you above spring melt, or in this case, I can cover it. I create a mini greenhouse. The reason we're making this video is because we've been going through this exact exercise of asking ourselves the question, why? And for us, the big question goes back to, why are we doing this? To feed ourselves, to get some semblance of sustainable food security. We'll just put it that way. There's a loaded term, but trying to do things that we can do ourselves, we can keep going ourselves, and they provide a fair bit of benefit, but they also don't kill us on the economic side of things. So As you've probably all noticed, some of our answers to these questions of why, or what do we need, and how do we get there, are not necessarily your standard answers. I.e., the pigs. The pigs went, and pig is a pretty standard answer, and pigs still have a lot of great merits. But for us, they don't work with the question that we're asking ourselves, the why. Because when we start looking at the metrics are basically your measures of how to classify, judge, quantify something. When you start looking at those metrics in relation back to our biggest answers of why, it didn't work for us. Doesn't mean it won't work for somebody else in a different system. And of course, the question why doesn't just happen once. You don't answer that question once in your life and never think about it again. You can break things down to the most basic fundamental pieces. Like I said, are you doing it for economic gain? Are you doing it to feed yourself? Or are you doing it for some other reason? All valid answers to that question. But that can also change over time. You can change your mind. You can change your answer as the world around you changes. So you may start out with one answer in one direction, and you may decide somewhere along the lines you change course. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the only way to really do that, well, you say this, and this is probably poor terminology, but kind of responsibly, where you are thinking about it, is to go back to that basic question and ask yourself, why? Why are we doing this? Why are we thinking about the change? Why are we doing the same thing we've done for all these years without changing? If you keep asking yourself that same question time and time again, you'll reinforce certain things that you basically know are no-brainers. And you'll also discover sort of, for lack of a better term, deficiencies or holes in your plan. Things that you thought were working, but when you keep revisiting the why, your bigger motivations of why you're doing something, you start to realize, well, it's not really working exactly the way we thought it was. And those are kind of not necessarily automatic things that you just stop doing, but they pause you to think about it a little harder. And I think that's a very important thing. So if there's one thing you take home from this video is, just like learning, reevaluating why you're doing things is something you should do throughout the entire time, probably your entire life, to be honest, but at least periodically, like a good schedule maybe once a year, because a lot of your growing kind of works in a 1-year schedule, give or take, right? Some things are longer, and sometimes you have to evaluate those over a longer time frame, and some things are shorter. Once a year, sitting down and asking those questions of why, and helping reinforce why you're doing things, or maybe why you should stop doing things, is a really good exercise to undertake. There's absolutely no harm in doing it, and you'll probably find that in the long term, although it will bring you to decisions that are very hard to make, in the long term, you'll probably find you're happier with the outcome, because things just will start to work better, or I hesitate to say this, but they may seem like less work. Because if some of your reasons to why is enjoyment factor, well, that's really hard to put into economic terms, because if you enjoy something, the time doesn't matter as much as if something is a job that you begrudge having to do, i.e. if you really detest raising chickens, well, maybe chickens aren't for you. But then you got to ask yourself, why am I raising chickens in the first place if I don't like chickens? And if your why still outweighs the cons, well, then it becomes kind of a no-brainer, and you can try to see how the cycle repeats itself. But anyways, that's some food for thought, or thought for food. And of course, it's not linear. It's not going to be the same for everybody, and everybody's going to have different answers.